I bid you welcome.
I welcome you to my house.
Welcome to my house.
Welcome to my home.
Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my horror house and welcome back to the year of James Herbert. Last video I looked at The Survivor, James Herbert's third novel. It's actually his first novel to be adapted into a movie, The Survivor from 1982, which we will be looking at now. Oh, how I would dearly love to say that The Survivor is a hidden gem. It doesn't quite achieve that status, I think. It's more of a curiosity, especially for fans of Herbert. It's a film where you can tantalizingly see greatness in there, but it's something that's never quite achieved, which is a real frustration and a real pity given some of the talent involved in the film. Now, the first big curiosity tick comes from the fact that it's directed by David Hemmings, who most horror fans, I myself certainly know mostly from his starring role in Dario Argento's best film, Deep Red, Profondo Rosso. He's definitely got an eye in. There's definitely something there. It's just something that doesn't quite coalesce here with The Survivor, and I think it's down mainly to script decisions. Some very strange decisions made when adapting the source material. The story is exactly the same. There is an aircraft crash that kills around about 300 people, and there is a lone survivor. The pilot, Keller, walks out of the crash completely unscathed. After this, around the site of the crash, strange supernatural events and deaths occur, and Keller himself is haunted by sort of his inability to remember what happened during the crash, and he is contacted by a psychic who says that she is hearing the screams of the dead who are unable to move on, and they want Keller to find out who was responsible for the crash. So far, so exactly the same. What I find very strange is that this film, it's made in Australia. It's made during the time fondly called the Ozploitation period, where there were massive tax breaks for filmmakers in Australia. So there were lots of sort of low budget action and exploitation movies getting made. It's where we get wonderful Mad Max from and things like that. But here the decision is made to sort of rein back from a lot of the extreme content in Herbert's novel and to make a much more creepy, sort of character-driven, internalized, low-key piece, which is really weird. It really could have done with a little bit more of an exploitation aesthetic and a little bit more of some of that extreme stuff that Herbert has in his novel, because once you strip that out, unless you're going to put something else in to leaven that bread, you've got really quite a thin story, and it does meander and it does lose its way because the surrounding hauntings, the sort of escalating violence and supernatural threat in the novel gives the narrative its engine, gives it a drive towards a resolution, that things are building towards some kind of finale. Whereas in this film, the hauntings and the revenge from the spirits of the dead are focused now mainly, well, not exclusively, on people who have exploited the crash for their own good. So there's a journalist who found his way onto the crash site minutes after the plane went down and is selling all of the sort of salacious photographs that he took on the site. I mean, that's straight out of the book, but his haunting and subsequent death has got nothing to do with sort of revenge for these transgressions per se, but everyone here who dies is in some way taking advantage of the crash, but not enough is made of it for that to be a legitimate channel for the hauntings. It's all kind of mealy-mouthed. It's all a little bit namby-pamby. The hauntings they're kind of just happening, and Keller is kind of just struggling to remember what happened with the crash, and we only know really that the spirits want him to solve it for them because the Hobbs character tells him, and we have to kind of take it on faith. There's a little bit of tell and no show, and there's not much tell because it's very sparse dialogue wise. It's lots of people wandering around, being dazed and haunted, going through their own personal sort of internalised traumas. Robert Powell's very good at that, actually. He seems very sort of aloof, and he's cut his emotions off. Very strong post-traumatic performance, and paired very nicely, I think, with Jenny Agutter, who brings the sort of emotional heft and the stakes as the psychic who's sort of being mentally and emotionally barraged from the things that he is cutting himself off from. A nice little pairing there, a nice little contrast that you could have done something with. Agutter and Powell are very good when they're on screen together. They're both phenomenal screen presences, trying to do quite a lot of something with quite a lot of nothing. That doesn't mean there aren't things to recommend in the movie. The opening is fantastic. The plane crash shot clearly on an economical basis and stitched together in the editing room is really powerful. And then the aftermath of the crash with the bits scattered all over it, and you've got the investigators, you've got scavengers picking over it as well, you've got the mourners who come to the site. All of that stuff is really deeply effective. The big wham bam of the crash at the start. And then where I find the film most effective is sort of where it's interrogating the bureaucracy of the aftermath of the crash, which sort of depersonalizes everything. You get the body bags taken to the church, and then they're sort of tagged and numbered very robotically. And then later on there's a scene where mourners are allowed to walk through areas of the crash site and just be there and mourn, and all the time over a tannoy. There's a very impersonal voice telling them which areas they can and can't go into, and don't go beyond this area, and you stick to this area. And again, sort of bureaucratic depersonalizing of this massive trauma and tragedy. The score's pretty fantastic. A lot of the time it's sort of a traditional sort of orchestral score, but every once in a while it goes into sort of squelchy electronica to sort of highlight that something weird and strange is going on. And then whenever we see a shot of the wreckage of the cockpit, there's a sound over it that's animalistic. It's almost like whale song, or think that strange noise when at the end of Duel, where the truck goes over the cliff, that's sort of animalistic. A sort of quasi-mechanical animal sound that absolutely fits the image that they're going for. And when you first hear stuff like the squelchy music and that effect, it's all very interesting and it piques my interest. And then it's just rinse and repeat. It's almost becomes like the Simpsons crow that squawks every time you see the nuclear power plant. Every time you see the cockpit, you hear that noise. Every time something weird happens, you get exactly the same squelchy effect. It's rinse and repeat ad nauseum, and it very quickly starts to lose its effect. The very first haunting of that photographer is very eerie and effective, and he sees the young girl and she lures him to a graveyard, and then he's wandering around and feels her hand in his, and then when he looks down he's holding her burnt doll. Nice, creepy and eerie. But her hauntings continue in a similar vein. We don't really see any other ghost. It's just her. We just get more of the same until we get to the end, and a fairly explosive ending set again in another wonderful scene where the crash investigators are piecing the plane back together in a massive hangar, and it looks like a skeleton. It looks like a kind of animal's graveyard. Some great striking visuals here, just not tied together with a plot that has an engine, because the supernatural haunting revenge strand of it has really been stripped. It's been completely defanged, which is a massive shame. this would be a case where I would suggest that the source material is ripe for a remake, but bizarrely, as I discussed in my video for the book of The Survivor, the story's been magpied in very strange ways. There's an entire section in the middle of Tom Cruise's Mummy, which essentially is The Survivor, and there are elements of this novel, and especially the ending, which M. Night Shyamalan has used in Unbreakable and The Sixth Sense. There are a couple of things that this movie does that the book doesn't do. I think the way it handles the revelation at the ending is more lyrical, much more visual, as you would hope for a movie adaptation, than the book, which ramps up and resolves things in its own way, but not in a very cinematic way. There's a nice solution to that problem for this adaptation to make it much more cinematic, which I really like. And a strange sort of Twilight Zone-y mystery at the end with a sort of, is it a premonition, is it a time loop kind of thing going on, which is something that you can do really well with moving pictures and sound, and showing the same scene a couple of times, but now the context has changed, and it feels a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle fitting together. If only more of the movie had been like that. If you're going to strip out elements from the novel, I wish there'd been a little bit more creative chutzpah with adding new and interesting things in its place. As it is, I was very happy that I had read the novel right before watching the movie, because I knew what was going on. It strangely adheres quite closely to the novel. It just rips out loads of bits. And I do wonder what kind of a viewing experience it would be not being familiar with the book. It does seem that it would probably feel a little bit light, but maybe that's just me. What do you think? Have you seen it? You can watch it here on YouTube if you want, and I will link to it. And please let me know what you think. Oh, how I would dearly love to say that The Survivor is a hidden gem